Well, I was watching JW Broadcast's January program a few days ago, and part of the program was Brother David Splain talking about their revision of the meaning of the book of Joel. I wrote an article on it earlier in the week, so I won't go into it too much, but back in October, when I'd heard that they spoke about this at the annual meeting, I published a video and brought out how I contacted the Watchtower back in the 90s about how the locusts could not possibly represent Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, I was pleased that they finally got that figured out. But I am still puzzled over the rest of their explanation that became apparent watching this video. And someone just brought to my attention that the April 2020 Watchtower has basically the same information. So they figured out that the northerner is attacking God's people. That's the locust. And Jehovah intervenes and takes care of them. Well, they say that the locust attack was when Babylon destroyed Jerusalem back in 607, whenever. And then Jehovah intervenes and compensates his people for the loss. And that took place in 1919. Don't ask me to explain that because it doesn't make any sense. But I don't want to talk about that. Now, I've been doing this, not necessarily videos. YouTube wasn't around when I started my website at ewatchman.com. But I began publishing articles discussing prophecy from my perspective. And I remember back, it must have been like 2003, 2004, someone had left a comment on my, I had a discussion board back then, if I recall, and someone had said they had been to an assembly, I think a circuit assembly, and the circuit overseer or district overseer or whoever was talking about this fellow on the internet who was pretending to be one of Jehovah's Witnesses. And he would answer people's questions. Well, he was obviously speaking about me. And at the time, before 2005, I published anonymously. And I was still one of Jehovah's Witnesses in good standing. I would go out in service, go to meetings and all of that. When I sent out my first open letter, of course, I put my name on it and I was no longer anonymous. But anyway, he proceeded to talk about this fellow on the internet. And he said he's like a spider. He's weaving his web and trying to draw you in to trap you and wreck your faith. Well, as it turns out, over the years, many of the things that I've published have been presented in the Watchtower years later as new light or adjustments or whatever they call them. The locus of Joel, that's just one of many. Back in 2013, they came out with a major adjustment. I think the July 2013 Watchtower had a few articles on that, and I published a series of 8 articles commenting on that. If you want to find those, they're under Watchtower Review on ewatchman.com. But anyway, they came out with this adjustment that the faithful and discreet slave was not appointed over all the master's belongings in 1918 or 1919. And that the wise and foolish virgins did not go out to meet the bridegroom then either. And of course, this is something I published long before that in articles, and then in the first edition of Jehovah Himself Has Become King in 2005, which was distributed to all the governing body at that time. Since then, there have been other little things like a few years ago, they came out with new light and said that the iron and clay feet of this image in the second chapter of Daniel was the Anglo-American dual world power. It seems like a no-brainer to me, but prior to that, they said that it was symbolizing a politically divided world. Well, yeah. Anyway, that's kind of an inconsequential point. I think probably the main adjustment, it was very under the radar. I mean, it wasn't announced at an annual meeting, or it was actually just a little footnote in the Ezekiel commentary published a couple years ago, Pure Worship Restored at Last. And it said, yeah, we no longer think that ancient Jerusalem and Israel prefigured Christendom. And to me, that was a big deal, a big adjustment, because they have written reams and reams of prophetic interpretation and all the books of Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah, all showing how God is going to punish the clergy of Christendom for all of their wickedness, which of course he is. But now they're saying, no, those prophecies weren't talking about Christendom at all. And that was just a little teaching box, they call it. And they left it at that. Just as this prophecy of Joel, the revision, that the locusts have no modern day counterpart. So it seems to me that they're just like nullifying Bible prophecy. They're turning it into, these nice little lessons for the publishers, and with they've taken away Jehovah's voice, or they're trying to. Good luck with that, right? Yeah, but thinking people would say, well, if all of these prophecies were not speaking about Christendom, then what does Israel and apostate Jerusalem, what do they represent? Because they do represent something. And, I could spend hours talking about it, because all of the prophecies have to do with the coming of Christ, the second coming, more especially. They weave it together a lot, but so that is a big one, and that the ancient Jerusalem no longer represents Christendom. Well, as I say, it seems that the Watchtower wants to take God's voice away. But my purpose, as a scurvy little spider, is to give God his voice back by applying his word specifically. And maybe that's what's got them running scared here. Take the first chapter of Isaiah. Verse 10. Hear the word of Jehovah. Who is he talking to? Well, he goes on to say, you dictators of Sodom, pay attention to the law of our God, you people of Gomorrah. Not a very flattering designation. Right? Dictators of Sodom? Those were the two most iniquitous cities in the Bible, which Jehovah incinerated, so they didn't even exist then. But Jehovah is showing his displeasure, his disrespect for these men. And now, as the Watchtower says, this isn't talking about Christendom. And it says, pay attention to the law of our God. So God is addressing those who are his people. Don't Jehovah's Witnesses claim to be God's people? Jehovah's people? Well, he has a message for you. Hear the word of Jehovah. And then God goes on to state from his perspective, the way he sees this religion. Of what benefit to me are your many sacrifices, says Jehovah. I've had enough of your burnt offerings of rams and the fat of well-fed animals. I have no delight in the blood of young bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has required this from you? This trampling of my courtyards. Stop bringing in any more worthless grain offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, the calling of conventions. I cannot put up with the use of magical power along with your solemn assembly. I have hated your new moons and your festivals. They have become a burden to me, and I'm tired of bearing them. When you spread out your palms, I hide my eyes from you. Although you offer many prayers, I'm not listening. Scary, isn't it? Your hands are filled with blood. Wash yourselves, make yourselves clean, remove your evil deeds from my sight. Stop doing bad. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct the oppressor, defend the rights of the fatherless child, and plead the cause of the widow. Well, is all lost for this religious organization that claims to worship God and does all the things required, the sacrifices, the festival, the assemblies? Field service is a sacrifice of praise, right? Jehovah says, stop it. I'm sick of it. I'm tired of bearing you. I'm tired of protecting you. Learn to do justice. For who? The fatherless child. How about a child that's been raped? How about a child that's been sexually abused by a member of the same religion? Where is the justice? Surely the men of God will expose this predator. They'll annihilate him from out of the congregation, right? Well, no. Sadly, no. In fact, the Watchtower has gone to great lengths to shield pedophiles from exposure, from answering to the law. The Watchtower has instructed her elders to refuse to cooperate with law enforcement officials. And any abused child that takes their case to a worldly court, the Watchtower's lawyers treat them as an adversary. The Watchtowers try to mute Jehovah's voice. They're not going to be able to do it. Well, how can we be sure that this is speaking about Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, verse 18, come now, and let us set matters straight between us, says Jehovah. Though your sins are like scarlet, they will be made white as snow. Though they are as red as crimson cloth, they will become like wool. If you show willingness and listen, you will eat the good things of the land. But if you refuse and rebel, you will be devoured by the sword, for the mouth of Jehovah has spoken it. Well, you go into the next chapter, just a few verses on. The mountain of the house of Jehovah is lifted up above the hills. The Watchtower says, yeah, that happened back in 1914. We're all streaming up to the mountain. Well, that just ain't so. Because the mountain is not lifted up until Jehovah enters into judgment with the sword. Verse 25. I will turn my hand against you, and I will smelt away your dross with lye, and I will remove all your impurities. So the only way for God to correct these dictators of Sodom, they have to be subjected to the fire of intense heat and persecution. Their organization is going to implode. Oh, God would never do that. We're Jehovah's righteous people. We've established pure worship earthwide. Jesus said God can make the stones cry out. He doesn't need a big multi-billion-dollar publishing company to do his work. He's used them, yeah. But he has expected them to learn justice and to do what is right. And they have failed spectacularly. And Jehovah's still going to accomplish his purpose, but it's going to be a painful ordeal. And some are going to be eliminated. Isn't that what Jesus said? When he comes to judge his slaves, there's a faithful slave and there is an unfaithful slave. Well, the Watchtower came out with that new light back in 2013. Said, yeah, well, there's an evil slave, but don't think anything about that. He's yeah. So now I've spoken a lot about this, but this is one bit of new light that you'll never hear from the Watchtower because they are committed to this fraud, this hoax, that Jesus came in 1914. That's the delusion. And so they are committed to teaching that World War I and the Spanish flu, that fulfilled prophecy, and we've been living in the last days for over 100 years and on and on. That's why they believe the mountain of the house of Jehovah was lifted up, because it says in the final part of the days. Well, the Watchtower has said, I think it was in the Reasoning from the Scriptures book, when dealing with a householder that says, well, what if there's another world war and all this stuff in the future? And you explain to them, no, that can't be. Because the prophecies that Jesus foretold, nation rising against nation, kingdom against kingdom, food shortages, pestilence, it's like a fingerprint. And every fingerprint is unique. And so there can't be two fingerprints of the same. So all of this has already happened. It can't happen again in the future. So what the Watchtower is saying, there cannot be another world war. There cannot be this global pandemic, this pestilence. And the Spanish influenza was horrific. It killed more people than the First World War, and it did it in a few months. There were only a couple small islands that were so isolated that the virus didn't make it there. But that flu was so deadly, a person could get it, come down with a fever and like a cold, and the next day they would be dead. So it was a horrible, horrible pandemic. There's no question about it. But what foolishness to say that these things could never happen again. Because 2 weeks ago, when the United States took out this Iranian terrorist, Soleimani, people have forgotten about that already, but the trending term was, at that time, for 24 hours or so, World War III. Are the Iranians going to retaliate? Will that bring in Russia and China and World War? That's back to business as usual. This week, it's all about the coronavirus. And from what I've read, it has the same rate of lethality as the Spanish flu. In other words, it is going to kill people about the same ratio. Well, we'll see how that goes. I mean, modern medicine didn't have anything really to treat the Spanish influenza virus. And there really is no treatment for a virus once you get it. But I mean, here we are. You know, I haven't watched much of this impeachment thing, but it doesn't look like they're going to be able to impeach the president. And the whole thing is so ridiculous. But when you get down to the real reason, Donald Trump wants to ally the United States with Russia and China and India. He's stated it. And there is a war faction associated with the City of London and the big military-industrial complex. That's our king of the North, right? And they have these secret embedded agents in the intelligence community who are working. They have their media outlets. CNN and MSNBC, they're like a mouthpiece for the CIA. And they even have hired some guys that were fired or done with their time in the intelligence community. So their intention is they think they're going to subjugate Russia and China. For the past 20 years, since the collapse of the Soviet Union, they've built dozens and dozens of military bases ringing around Russia and China. And their latest exploit was orchestrating a coup in Ukraine so as to bring up NATO forces right to the border of Russia. And at this very moment, the United States is conducting a military training exercise, the biggest since the Cold War, right in that area. Somebody is intent on having a war. And a war with Russia and China, it'll be a nuclear war. It'll have to be a nuclear war. I mean, there are madmen running this, but of course, we're all just a bunch of little grasshoppers. It really comes down to Jehovah and Satan. And Satan has got it rigged. You know, I mean, he would love to just keep going on the way things are, I'm sure. He gets to play God and do his thing. But when Christ comes in his kingdom, then he knows the game is up. Like it says in Revelation, Satan, when he's thrown down, he comes down in a great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. So he's got it rigged. It's like, I've used this illustration before. It's like a thief, a robber that goes into a bank and he takes a bunch of hostages and he wants to get the money and get out and make a safe getaway. And he threatens them, if you try to take me out, the hostages are going to get it. So Satan is basically taking the world hostage. Any move by Christ, you think the meek are going to inherit the earth? Well, it'll be a radioactive cinder when I'm done with it. That's Satan. So that's where we are. And it's unfortunate that Watchtower is, touted itself as the Watchman, and that's why they call themselves the Watchtower, right? They're completely oblivious. They have no clue what's happening. But we'll see. I mean, I have more to say, hopefully. Thanks for watching.